Alexandria, 391 CE. Hypatia watches as the Serapeum prepares for siege. Alexandrian pagans have built barricades to cut off the steep, narrow steps at its entrance. Now there they stand, defending the 6th-century-old pillars and galleries with stones and clubs. The problem had begun when Bishop Theophilus had discovered a secret pagan temple still in operation. He raided the building, defiling it by carrying its sacred, secret images out for all to see. And in anger, the city's pagans have now seized Christian hostages and fortified this great temple. Rumors are that the hostages are being beaten and forced to sacrifice to pagan gods. Christian mobs furious at the action are retaliating by stealing and smashing god images displayed outside other pagan homes. Among the leadership in the Serapeum is a group of Neoplatonist philosophers, and they're the ones that receive the messenger from Bishop Theophilus, informing them that the governor is offering them a deal. Leave the Serapeum, and they will be pardoned. Otherwise, they'll be executed as rebels. The pagan defenders surrender, and the soldiers enter the Serapeum. They not only destroy its art and its idols, they pull the very walls down. Despite being a Neoplatonist pagan, Hypatia doesn't condemn this action, for she is playing a much subtler game. Thanks so much to Brilliant for continuing to support our passion for lifelong learning. Hypatia lived during a time of massive religious and cultural change in the Roman Empire. Born only a few decades after Constantine had become the first emperor to convert to Christianity, it was a time when paganism was in decline, both naturally and due to legislation. In fact, Emperor Theodosius I, the ruler for most of Hypatia's life and the last emperor to rule both East and West, was a devout Christian and famous for suppressing paganism. Now, whether he deserves that reputation is complicated, though. It is true that Theodosius ensured that neglected laws against pagan sacrifices and divination were enforced, and that he took pagan celebrations off of the calendar of public holidays. But in his early reign, he also courted the support of pagan political factions and appointed pagans to high offices. Though he tried to ban worship at pagan temples, he also broadly tried to preserve them rather than destroy them, and it's largely believed that his anti-pagan laws were only enforced in cities. In fact, he seems to have been far more zealous about persecuting the Christians he considered heretics. That did not mean his reign was a safe time to be a pagan, though. Outbreaks of violence between Christians and pagans had been going on for decades, and some local bishops used his legal codes to go after pagan populations and sack religious structures. In other words, how safe it was to be a pagan really depended on who your local bishop was, their attitude toward religious coexistence, and how prone the population of your province was towards sectarian violence. Because Christian communities weren't monoliths. In fact, now might be a good time to remind us all that people aren't monoliths! And despite what happened at the Serapeum in 391, in general it appears Bishop Theophilus was a moderate on paganism, or at least certain types of it. And we know that particularly because he seems to have favored the woman this series is named after, Hypatia. During his tenure as bishop, he apparently helped introduce her to the councils and organizations that helped run the city, some of which she joined. While she didn't hold official positions as far as we know, Hypatia was a figure who would be brought in for advice, even by the governor and bishops who were her former students. And while female advisors were not unheard of in the ancient world, where priestesses and oracles could hold a lot of power, it was still unusual. Plus, while it might seem strange that a bishop who was attacking Neoplatonist philosophers actually counted Hypatia, another Neoplatonist, as an advisor, there's a very good reason for that. See, as much as Christians were not a monolith, neither were pagans. Because again, people aren't monoliths! Sorry, you get the idea. Hypatia and her father were Neoplatonists, but they were from the classical school of it, whereas the Neoplatonists at the Serapeum were from a more recent offshoot that was more concerned with ritual, god images, and divination. In other words, all of the things that the Christians wanted to wipe out. Hypatia's brand of Neoplatonism, by contrast, well, you know what? Let's just go to the chart of the Neoplatonist universe, shall we? Wheel that thing out, let's go. Okay, so up here is the One. It's an intangible, universal force creating and binding everything. Then this below it here is the intellect. It's also intangible, but is more conceptual. It's intelligence, the life of the mind. But we are still on a galactic level here. Then below that is the soul. This is the aspect of the One that can interact with the physical world, and shards of it are broken off and trapped into human bodies. So if you live a life of intellectual pursuits, philosophy, ethical living, and don't focus on the mortal shell, you could then connect more with the intellect, and eventually at death, rejoin the One. So like there was no Zeus or idols or killing sheep to read their entrails kind of thing. In fact, if someone described this to you, you might not even think of it as paganism, which is exactly the point. Neoplatonism, as Hypatia practiced it, did not directly contradict Christianity. And if you squinted and turned your head just a little bit, you could kinda argue that the One was the Christian God. They also shared certain beliefs, such as the idea that the body was corrupt while the soul was sacred. Remember last week, when Hypatia waved her sanitary rag at an admirer to drive him off? Well, one interpretation of that event is that she was reminding him that all of our human bodies are corrupt, and that he was forgetting his studies of the infinite intellect by lusting after a temporary mortal shell. And Christians could respect that. In fact, it's likely that part of the reason Hypatia was so highly regarded was due to her lifelong vow of chastity. Both Christianity and Hellenistic paganism contained traditions of women who declined marriage and children, nuns in Christianity, Vestal virgins and oracles in paganism, which supposedly helped give them special insights and spiritual power. In other words, Hypatia was easy to accept despite changing times. Indeed, it's unclear whether she and her father would have even been that upset with their co-religionists being attacked. Her school of Neoplatonism were bitter rivals with the newer sects, and it could be argued she might not have even considered them Neoplatonists. That's not to say that everything in Alexandria was going great for everyone, though. Everyday life there was generally defined by peaceful coexistence, sure, but outbreaks of violence like the one that led to the standoff at the Serapeum could happen at any moment. There were sporadic street fights, mob violence, and vandalism of religious sites that might be triggered by anything from a slight by a political figure to even an unfounded rumor. Usually, this violence occurred between the Christian and Hellenistic pagan citizens, but the city's large Jewish quarter could also become the victim or perpetrator of religious attacks. However, we can't look at this totally through religion, because these communities were also distinct political blocs that politicians or bishops would try to win over in their attempts to influence the city. Meaning, religious violence could be political in nature, and vice versa. And this was part of what made Hypatia such a valued member of the higher echelons of Alexandrian society. Because as a figure respected by everyone who taught both Christians and pagans, and who was known for intelligence, virtue, wisdom, and chastity, she could serve as a bridge between communities. After all, who could dislike her? She was a renowned scholar, beloved by her students, whose advice was respected by the city's highest, while she also gave lectures to the city's lowest. Well, there was one guy. Bishop Theophilus had a nephew, Cyril. This dude followed his uncle everywhere, being groomed to serve as a successor to the office. And he paid especially close attention, it seemed, when his uncle led an army of both military troops and religious faithful on an expedition to attack a sect of monks he considered heretics. Yeah, this was the kind of bishop Cyril wanted to be. One that fused civil and religious power to pursue his enemies. Plus, he was not so moderate as his uncle when it came to pagans. Yet, no one took him seriously. That is until the year 412, when Theophilus suddenly died. Though Cyril was known to be Theophilus' successor, turned out the bishop had never officially named him so, and that gave license to political factions that disliked Cyril to support a rival candidate, Archdeacon Timothy. For 3 days, supporters of Cyril and Timothy just brawled in the streets, with the city's pagan and Jewish political blocs throwing their support behind Timothy. In the end, Cyril won out, taking up his uncle's status as patriarch, bishop, and his significant political power. And it's said that he vowed to turn that power on the Jews and pagans who had supported his rival. A path that would lead him on a violent collision course with the newly appointed Roman governor Orestes and his close ally, Hypatia of Alexandria. Now, as we mentioned before, Hypatia was someone who truly believed in educating everyone, and that's actually something that's very fortuitous for us right now, because today we get to tell you all about another group who has the same mission. Brilliant! Now, something I just love about y'all in the extra history community is that so many of you are passionate lifelong learners, but I also know it's hard to find the time to better your brain. Well, luckily, Brilliant was built for that, letting you learn on the go or whenever you have time about topics like science, mathematics, and engineering. It's sort of like anti-doom scrolling. it actually makes you feel good. And I think Brilliant is super engaging due to their first principles approach, with interactive lessons designed to build up your critical thinking skills through problem solving, not just memorization, which works way better for me. Now, in honor of Hypatia, over the last few weeks, I've been brushing up on some classical mathematics, in this case, geometry. And in around 15 minutes a day, their courses have taught me just way more that I can actually retain than any other way I've tried learning this stuff in the past. So if that sounds up your alley, and if you're watching our channel, I feel like it probably does, you can try everything Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days by visiting brilliant.org/extrahistory or by clicking the link in the description. Plus, that way you'll get 20% off an annual premium subscription. Heck yeah! So to become more brilliant, click here, and then once you've devoured some courses, check out another of our history videos here. The biggest being thanks to Angela Valenciana, Arclight Games, Dominic Valenciana, Hunter Z, Ilknerg, Izzy Coin, Joseph Blame, and Kuya Koi for being the best legendary patrons.